Okay. Hello, everyone. Once again, this is Nazish Shekha speaking from the Pakistan Business Council. I head the Center of Excellence in Responsible Business there. Just a little background about ourselves and this webinar. So the Pakistan Business Council and the GIZ have partnered together to identify what the climate-related risks are for businesses in Pakistan. And the way we'll be doing that is through a survey. And this webinar is dedicated for organizations to learn more about the survey and the overall topic of climate-related risks. So a little background about ourselves, about the PBC. For those of you who don't know, the Pakistan Business Council is a biggest business advocacy platform. And we have over 100 members of large companies. And what we do, or basic mandate is to do, is to research-based advocacy. So what that means is we collect valuable data and we use that to identify ways in which the economy of Pakistan can grow, and then we advocate for it with the various stakeholders, which include the government and other businesses as well, so that everybody's on, is on the same page on, what can help Pakistan as a whole. The topic of climate change and climate action is very important to the BBC, and in 2015, the Center of Excellence in Responsible Business was set up to raise the capacity of businesses in six strategic areas, which include environmental stewardship. And obviously, within environmental stewardship, a very important area is climate action. So with that, since 2018, we've been undertaking surveys within the business sector of Pakistan. And what we've identified so far is that while businesses are aware of climate change, there is less awareness of the need for climate action. And then obviously, with the advent of climate change, there's a less awareness about climate-related risks as well. So that's why we're partnering with the GIZ to move forward on this. So this is about the Center of Excellence in Responsible Business. These are the activities or the advocacy we do is through webinars, workshops, and so on. And just introducing the topic of today's webinar and the agenda. So we'll just start off with a short introduction to the partnership. And then, since this is a call to action for the survey, Maha Qasim will be going over the survey's terminology, and then we'll get a little introduction to what climate-related risks mean for an entity in Pakistan, and then we'll ask an entity that is artistic milliners today to talk about what climate-related risks are for them. And then please feel free to post any questions in the chat box or the Q&A, and then we'll dedicate some time to the Q&A, and then obviously we'll launch the survey. So with this, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Baptiste Chatre. He heads the program, climate-related program at GIZ in Pakistan, to introduce what the GIZ stands for and a little bit about their overall project.
Yeah, thank you, Nazish. I hope you can hear me well and see also my short presentation. Thank you for organizing this webinar and for the invitation. I'm very glad to be right now talking about the project and this very important topic. I'm also very glad to be the only man in the among the panelists, so it's a very good sign, I think. So I will not here detail all the climate change consequences Pakistan is facing, because most probably all of you know that better than me, and I think it's now probably common sense in Pakistan. Even if I think we may speak too much about certain risks that are quite dramatic, like the floods or landslides, especially among the public opinion. Whereas others that are equally or probably more important, like the spread of new diseases, or I was thinking also about the scarcity or availability of water, which are worrying us more. But still, Pakistan is one of the most affected countries in the world when it comes to climate change consequences, and this is why we have this. We developed this strengthening climate adaptation and resilience project with the BMZ financing, and so this is a way for me, presenting the project is a way for me to present you the perspective, our perspective, when it comes to the preparation of Pakistan to deal with the climate change consequences and climate change risks. And so this is how we conceive and design our projects. So first of all, so there are three outputs. And first of all, I mean, when I get into detail, the first of all is working on the climate risk management information systems together with different worlds, academia, local civil society organization, local NGOs, and federal and provincial actors. And here you have a few examples of what we are doing in this field of climate risk management, including working with journalists, for example. Second is by strengthening the planning and financing capacities of climate adaptation and resilience, and this especially at the provincial and local levels. And third, improving the conditions for accessing international climate finance for climate adaptation and climate resilience. So working especially, I mean, training the different climate finance units of the public sector and also other stakeholders, and developing facilities for project proposal development, especially for the big funds like GCF, GEF, and etc. So in all this, I haven't mentioned the private sector, but the private sector should play a huge role, and not only the public sector or the civil society sector. So for this event and the study you mentioned, Nazish, will be acting as a kind of starting point on how to include the private sector in all the different processes I just mentioned. The private sector has, in particular, specific needs when it comes to the exposure to certain climate-related risks, and these risks are not only physical, so linked to the assets, for example, physical assets, but also transitional, to adapt to a new environment, to new policies, to new frameworks. So that is why this study and the survey will focus first on, here is a detail of the survey. So first on mapping and collecting information, then trying to identify best practices from other private actors that could lead to define new frameworks which can be used to develop further private actor capacities. So that was a little bit in a nutshell the context of this survey and the work PBC is doing. And I really thank you for the organization of the webinar and wish you all a very fruitful discussion. Thank you, Nazish. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. I would like to now invite Maha Qasim from 0 Point Partners to talk more about the survey and to go through the technical elements and what the terminology is in. Maha, over to you.
Thank you, Nazish. I hope everyone can see the screen. Yeah. So everyone, thank you so much for being part of this webinar. The survey really is aimed towards understanding the current status of climate risk awareness among businesses in Pakistan. And this will be followed by sort of focus group discussions, sector-wise focus group discussions to really understand what kind of actions companies are already taking to address climate risks to their business models and supply chains, and what their level of preparedness is at present. This will also be followed by capacity building sessions, and in collaboration with SERB, they will be developing a climate transition planning guidebook to help build capacity among the different businesses in Pakistan to comply with the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures Framework, and also facilitate annual reporting on the ISSB standards. So according to the World Bank's Country Climate and Development Report, climate impacts will have both direct and indirect consequences for economic growth in Pakistan. The focus on extreme scenarios really magnifies these impacts and highlights the importance of heat-related impacts on labor productivity, crop loss, health, agriculture, and industry. So we've already seen that agriculture and industry will be more impacted than the services sector. And really, the global warming and extreme heat events affect economic activity through multiple transmission channels, including, of course, direct impacts on lives and livelihoods, but also infrastructure, assets, etc. So the survey and the follow-up are divided into 5 sections. Initially, we will be mapping the climate risks, collecting data from all the participants, identifying best practices based on your survey responses and the focus group discussions. Then we will analyze the data, and of course, the survey report and results will be shared with all the participants as well as members of the PBC and other major business platforms in Pakistan. So for those of you who are familiar with the TCFD framework, the focus is on 4 themes, including governance, strategy, risk management, and targets and metrics. So the survey itself follows a similar format. It's divided into 5 sections. The first one actually is just around questions around your own organization's details, including like company name, legal status, things like that. So section A focuses on organizational details. The second section focuses on business action for climate change. So really understanding where companies are on their climate risk assessment journey. Is this part of your business decision-making processes, things like that. The next section, section C, focuses on managing climate, environmental, and social risks. So really trying to understand if the companies or organizations are already undertaking some sort of action to address some of the environmental and social risks to their businesses, including, of course, climate risk. The next section focuses on organizational climate strategy. So understanding whether climate risk assessment, identification, and management is already integrated into your business strategy, who's responsible for undertaking or implementing that strategy. And finally, the last section focuses on climate governance and leadership within your organization. So really trying to understand whether at the board level or at the senior management level, climate risk is something that's been highlighted already, or whether there is already some sort of a team or a committee that is undertaking climate risk awareness within your organization. So these are kind of broadly the 5 sections for the survey. Total, there are 28 questions. So it shouldn't take longer than, I would say, around 20 to 25 minutes to complete the survey if all of the data is available to you. The questions are all qualitative in nature. So, of course, there will be an element of subjectivity, but we really want to understand from the organizations themselves where they believe they are on their climate risk awareness status. So really kind of getting your perspective on where you think you are. And then, of course, once we analyze the results, we'll have a better understanding of just sector-wise awareness and things like that. Largely, the survey will be anonymous. In the report itself, we will not be sharing individual company names. There may be some sector-wide trends that we might mention, but your responses are confidential. And of course, the names of individual organizations will not be shared in the actual report. So as I mentioned, there are 28 questions in total, and we've also included a glossary. So I'll just quickly go through that right now. Some of these terms you might already be aware of, but we have provided this as part of the survey itself. It's towards the end of the survey. So once you scroll through the actual link, I believe the link has been shared with you ahead of this webinar. So once you scroll through the entire survey, towards the end, you will be able to see a glossary of terms and terminologies that might come up in the survey. So I would encourage you to quickly go through the glossary so that you understand exactly what the question is asking, and it will help you actually to provide a more tailored response. So some of the terms that might come up, abatement technology, so processes or methods that have the potential to reduce exposure to greenhouse gas emissions. And these could be, part of your industrial processes already, maybe, scrubbers if you're a utility company or a power generation firm, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to the atmosphere. Then biodiversity loss refers to the decline in the number, genetic variability and variety of species and biological communities. Carbon footprint, of course, everyone's probably familiar with. Terms like carbon neutral, so just because there is a bit of ambiguity along these terms, so we've provided specific definitions so that you are clear on what we mean by the term carbon neutral. So here, what it means is to balance your carbon emissions with absorptions or carbon removals. Carbon negative is essentially if you're removing or absorbing more carbon from the atmosphere than the organization is emitting. Then offsets, again, I think most people here must be familiar with that. And risks include climate change risks that can be either event-driven, so acute risks, and those associated with longer-term shifts in climate patterns, so chronic risks like gradual temperature rise. Acute risks could be events like floods or heat waves, droughts, wildfires, things like that. Then, of course, climate action is the efforts that you as an organization are taking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity. Green ammonia, again, these are very technical terms. They might not apply to all organizations, particularly like maybe the financial sector or others, but we've included definitions just so that it's clear in terms of your responses, what we're asking for. Net zero here, cutting greenhouse gas emissions to zero with any remaining emissions reabsorbed into the atmosphere, criteria, and of course, transportation. So in a nutshell, this is what the survey is about, and we look forward to your responses. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to email Nazish, and I'm sure we'll get back to you with a response if you have any confusion or questions about how to actually complete the survey. Nazish, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Maha, for telling us a little bit about the survey. If you guys have the attendees have any Q&As related to it, do put them in the chat box or the Q&A section, and then, we can sort of address them towards the end of the webinar. I'd now like to invite our next speaker, and for this, we're now going to try and see, we've talked about what the survey will try and address, but the next stage is to see if what are actually climate-related risks for an entity in Pakistan. And I'm now inviting Miriam Kugele, who looks at sustainability at the Khan University, and she has a wide background of looking at climate-related risks in Pakistan. So over to you, Miriam.
Thank you, Nazish. Welcome everyone to this webinar at a very opportune time. Clearly, you're not seeing my presentation. Are you now seeing my presentation?
Just waiting for it.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, super. So yes, thanks for the opportunity to speak about some of the climate-related risks that we've been analyzing and addressing at the Khan University. So just wanted to start clarifying what AKU really is. We're not only a hospital, and we don't only exist at Stadium Road, but actually we have facilities in 120 cities and locations across the country. Some of the numbers are mentioned here on the left. And then we have non-health related stuff as well, including the Institute for Education and Development with posts across the country and the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, amongst a whole range of other activities. AKU is also present in 5 other countries of the world. This is just for your context, but today I'll be giving examples from Pakistan. Also, our sister agency, the Arhan Health Services, works in Pakistan. And again, some of the facilities are spread really far across the country. We work very closely together in terms of our environment sustainability work as an AKDN or Arhan Development Whole kind of approach. And just to show you maybe some of the diversity, even just from the healthcare side, this is a picture of our Stadium Road campus, a 700-bed tertiary, actually quaternary hospital, amongst other things, ranging all the way to small basic healthcare facilities in mountainous areas. Very different context, very different exposure, and therefore climate risks. What do we know?
I'm sorry, Miriam, we can't, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, Miriam, just to interrupt you, but we can't see your slides properly. I can see your notes, so maybe you can put it up in full screen.
That's very interesting. Let's try that again. And thanks for interrupting. Do you see the slides?
Yes, yes, they're great now.
Super. So sorry about that earlier. So just in case you wanted to see, there was 2 pictures and you didn't before in terms of the range of activities and very different exposure and risks in the country. Here in this slide, I quickly wanted to focus just on the health aspect. So we know, of course, that LMICs, low and middle income countries, are amongst the most vulnerable, and therefore the huge cost to not just facilities, but really people, and therefore the healthcare system. Our global discourse for the countries in which we operate, including Pakistan, really focuses on adaptation, right? However, at the same time, we have this additional pressure as fossil fuel, which is our main source of energy, continues to rise amongst increasing poverty and energy access issues as well. Obviously, climate change, as is shown in the middle, also affects climate health, human health, and so it has this actually ripple effect, and that is because healthcare provision itself is actually responsible for over 5% of global emissions. This is not very well known. Why is that? Well, healthcare operations are incredibly carbon intensive, fuel intensive, fossil fuel intensive most of the time, right? And turns out that in LMICs such as here, we're even more carbon intensive. Why is that so? Because we need generators to back up an already relatively dirty grid. We need to import a lot of products from abroad. Our transportation systems are not half as efficient, and so on and so forth. And of course, under the SDGs, we have this goal to increase our access, right, and reach more people with healthcare, which has been calculated by our colleagues to increase emissions by at least 16% if we were to reach this goal. So this is a problem. Clearly, we can't keep going this way, right? And so AKU, now this is a step back a little bit. AKUs always, since 40 years since our existence, had quite a mature risk management approach, given the field we're in, and that includes healthcare. So there's various policies, online and offline systems, a whole central team across various geographies, and a robust process for monitoring, training, and the rest, with reporting all the way to the board. And so this is really an ongoing process that is tracked with KPIs online. And since our sustainability work has been more embedded in our operations and academic front in recent years, we're now considered one of the top 15 risks of the university. Given the scope of work that we do, I think you get the idea that being amongst the top 15 risks is considerable. So it's something we take quite serious. Now, for today, I just wanted to quickly walk through 4 types of risks that we have started looking at and how we've started addressing them. These are just some examples because I don't want to keep going all day. So in terms of infrastructure and operational risks, this is the context, right? Mainly, it's just the cost is going through the roof, right? And that is a kind of systemic issue that we face, but at the same time, I think there's some, yeah, super, less echo. Of course, there's these more acute risks as well, such as heat stress onto buildings, which actually builds up over time as well. Floods were mentioned earlier. And the risk eventually that we are going to have to cost carbon. I think we just have to live in that reality that eventually there will be a price on carbon, and that will affect our operations. Remember, healthcare operations and actually university operations as well, due to the type of research being done, are very carbon intensive. So we now have a net zero goal to 2030, right? In line with science, so SBTI conform. And of course, the old management saying means we have to start measuring what we do. What we started with some 3 years ago is actually developing our own carbon management tool. This is how it's known. It's by now actually endorsed by the World Health Organization, that has recognized that, yes, this is all in line with science, using all the publicly available and scientifically published carbon factors. And there's a whole number of innovations in this tool, including that you can now actually account for emissions that arise in healthcare specifically, such as around anesthetic gases, which is shown in this tab. It's an Excel sheet, or inhalers, as well as the supply chain. Maybe just worth noting that this tool is publicly available or free of access, and applicable to sectors other than health also, right? So actually other industries, including banks, hotels, and many others are currently using it and finding it quite helpful. By the way, it also tracks cost, and so that's of course really important for decision making, and that's quite fun. So here, I just really quickly wanted to show you for 2022, for just 1 year, where our emissions lie. You may be surprised what you see here in blue, which is our scope 3, or the entire value chain, which actually is not unusual in the medical or healthcare sector to be highly dominant, and actually 70%. So that is quite normal actually in our realm of work. But then of course, even on the operational side, building energy, refrigerants being really big up there, and anesthetic gases and others, right? So this of course has now helped us to identify the way forward. So here are 4 of the kind of areas under which we've identified more than 100 measures for this geography, meaning Pakistan alone, on how to reduce emissions. So all the way from different types of solar, right, for PV and for water, biomass, and others. Of course, energy efficiency within our buildings, the obvious stuff like LEDs and ACs, but also the more complicated stuff where you have to upgrade building infrastructure. Practice changes, right? So sometimes these are cost neutral. For example, how you use your fleet and how you plan your trips, right? Or in terms of the use of anesthetic gases, a lot can be done. And of course, in buildings ourselves, right? Which in terms of insulation, windows, and the rest takes a lot more money, but sometimes pays back really quickly as well. In terms of, for example, window reflective film in our buildings is a really low-hanging fruit to reduce heat gain. And so we've costed all of these, and actually what we have really figured out is decarbonization is good business, right? And that's what I wanted to share as the main learning of that first risk in terms of operational cost and resilience. Because really the question is kind of, why didn't we do this stuff earlier in terms of reducing our energy use? But I guess now 2 agendas come together, right? Increasingly high cost and a climate agenda. Now it's becoming, we're costing it, right? And we're bringing it into the budgeting process. And I suppose also experimenting a bit more with different financing options. So that's quite exciting. Probably just worth noting, in case you're taking a screenshot or something of this graph. Of course, this really differs depending on the type of facility you run and where you're located, etc. So one really has to run some analyses for specific numbers that are behind this graph to come out. The second area I wanted to talk about is supply chain related risks, and I'm sure for every industry this is really relevant. If we were just a university, as in the Aga Khan University, maybe this wouldn't be so relevant because we'd be talking about laptops and paper. But since we run healthcare facilities, this is really critical, and the pandemic, as well as the floods last year, really brought home this message of disruption of supply chains. Again, actually, the war between Russia and the Ukraine these days, again, reminds us of that. With the effect, of course, of often increasing cost, as well as the variability of cost of goods and services. And there's much more uncertainty, I guess, generally in climate change, there's just much more uncertainty. And that's really interesting to have discussions about in terms of who is involved at which stage of decision making, how much should be stockpiled, etc. So those are really good conversations to have. Sometimes quality can also be affected, especially through events like heat, precipitation, etc. Regulatory changes actually come into this as well, right? So during the pandemic, we saw some of this that had to be adjusted for. And I added here also end-of-life considerations. So increasingly, we're taking a look at or maybe asked to take a look at also, if we're not doing it on our own, and we, I mean, generally the world, to look at whole life approaches, right, from cradle to grave or whatever you call it. So you don't just buy a piece of machinery, but at some point it's going to be discarded. And that actually becomes part of our value chain in our scope 3. And so that's really important to look at. Again, you saw in the pie chart earlier, or the sundial graph, we're looking at our scope 3, and it does include waste. And so we're really starting to be able to, you know, from our detailed scope 3 accounting and having set emission reductions targets, really now engage our suppliers and foster stronger relations. So when supply chains do get you know, stretched, that we can be, you know, through those good relations, we can ensure the supply chain is manageable. We're making updates to our procurement policy and our practices. So practices, for example, includes that now the onboarding of new vendors, we are asking suppliers to fill out a little survey in terms of where they are on their sustainability work. And that survey, it's, you know, they can say no, no, no to all questions, but it does prompt them to think, and it does educate them, because there's this little question mark they can click on to get more information, for example, on what a term means. Or another resource such as the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, on where they could read up more about greenhouse gas accounting, amongst a range of other things. And then, of course, planning and warehousing. So what I put in here is a picture of the engagement AKU had last year amongst the floods in Sindh in particular, because that's where we have a very strong presence, and how it was really, really good that we had stockpiles of certain things so that we could reach out to communities to support. So these just again is a few examples of how our risk analysis and our carbon data is helping us to move forward. Health-related risks, maybe this group is not quite as aware, and I definitely don't want to get into the technical details here, but we're talking about direct health risks, right? Being affected by extreme events as one example, or being affected by by heat. I think we all know what that feels like, especially for those of us based in Karachi. So extreme events really play a huge role there. Health systems, though, of course, are at risk and are being analyzed, right? There's a lot of guidance from WHO and related sources on how to address that. And of course, it becomes a question of capacity, right? So if in a major disease outbreak, vector-borne disease outbreak, if you wish, one can take the example of dengue, right? More mosquitoes during climate change, right? It means more dengue. Then do healthcare facilities really have the ability to address such waves? That becomes a real question that has to be managed. And so some of the work that AKU has always been doing on this is extensive research, right? Academic research, of course, on these various areas. I'm not going to read them out. And then, of course, using some of this research to inform policy, given the role we have in the country, but also informing our own planning forward, to say this is what we can learn, therefore we need XYZ resources, be it capacity or stuff. To move forward, or this is other locations we should get our services into, and other collaborations, etc. So that's quite useful to have those risks assessed given the sector we're in. And finally, I just wanted to mention reputational risks as one of those things, I suppose, more from the framework of a university that we are concerned about. And it is because university is always thought to be at the forefront of action and innovation, but that sometimes stands in a great tension with the pace of academic research and communications work. Academic research is not the fastest anywhere, right? simply due to the rigor of it, right? And sometimes that stands in a tension with climate action, right? We think of climate change as something happening in 2050, 2030, very long-term goals, and research happens in those kind of timeframes as well, right? But we really need to act today, and sometimes that can be a bit of tension there. Of course, climate change is changing the funding and financial landscape and the kind of funding we can access in our geographies. And so increasingly, actually, this is what I wanted to mention, increasingly funding agencies, whether locally or in particularly abroad, are asking us as a university in terms of what are you doing in terms of addressing the climate and climate-related risks. And therefore we have differing access to financial resources. And this is really important to consider for the other actors in the private sector as well. And regulatory risks, so I haven't seen those come up quite yet, but I do expect that over time this will be increasingly important in terms of how quickly can we move, but as well inform new regulation, new policies. So what I here wanted to just share in terms of that AKU is really already perceived in many fields to be amongst the leaders in this country, including, of course, in healthcare, educational development, and other realms. COVID response probably would be another one that comes to mind. But increasingly in the sustainability realm also, we do want to lead by example. And so we have this environment and climate commitment that is applicable across all the Aga Khan Development Network agencies. You see them listed here, and the net zero goal is very prominent in that, in the midst of course, addressing vulnerability of the communities in which we work. And this agenda is led by the oldest son of our Chancellor, His Highness the Aga Khan, who really says that AKU has a special role to play, and we do take that quite serious, as you've hopefully seen in some of the work I've mentioned. Just maybe to conclude, I wanted to share a few more examples around climate literacy, right? We keep talking about awareness, and awareness hopefully does eventually spur action. So we're trying to have our students and staff community more and more actively engaged to really feel and do, and then have, for example, even this President's Challenge where students are brought in to innovate and ideate around climate solutions. Last year around a theme of wasting nothing. Or on the right-hand side, a picture where for the first time, presumably in the country, for all that we're aware of, I taught a course to medical students to actually say, well, medical students eventually will be spokespersons and people who are listened to. So what role can they play in terms of climate action and climate literacy and promoting awareness? So they were trained in climate literacy. And of course, for even further in the public, AKU is doing a lot, whether it's on the educational side or, for example, this documentary series, which is now going to season 3. It's called Voices from the Roof of the World, with documentaries from the Central and South Asian region to inform people. This is an award-winning series. So if you haven't seen it, feel free to Google it. And really quickly to conclude, in terms of maybe some recommendations, what to take away from this. For us, it's been really helpful to think of risks holistically, all the factors of who, when, how can happen, and really maybe scenario-wise playing it through. I think it's really important in our experience to have our goals aligned with science and the latest science of what needs to be done to ameliorate climate change, and in line with industry standards, right? So I'll take again the medical realm. If we communicate something else to our pharmaceuticals, then maybe another purchaser is expecting from them. Then there's a disconnect, and they're not going to take us serious, right? So within the health realm, I mean, health specialists all across the world, or the health sector all across the world, is actually coming together to formulate some of these standards, just as one example. And of course, we know that ESG will become ever more expected, even in this part of the world. And again, this is a really fantastic opportunity for us today and in the future to come together and inform some of that capacity and decision making. Measurement management is continuous. I think that's obvious. But we also do need to plan for the unknown and become more comfortable with uncertainty, right? We really don't know what all may happen, right? There's the unknown unknown in a sense, not just the known unknown. Really important, we need to develop new skill sets and new ways of collaborating and decision making. So a lot of my work, or let me put it a different way to give you an example. I have a very tiny team and I work with people across the entire institution horizontally. But that's not how we're used to working. We're used to working horizontally. And so now actually sustainability is thoroughly questioning how organizations are structured. A really exciting time, pretty scary at times, but it's worthwhile thinking ahead in those ways. And of course, once you get started, huge benefits become visible. Just again to mention, for example, the operational cost saving when you produce your own renewable energy pays off really quickly. And I wanted to just leave that with as a last word of encouragement. My email address is also here in case you ever wanted to get in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Miriam. Lots to learn from the AKU here. I like the way that you presented the risks. You've identified the risks, and then you've gone and talked about the solutions. Although, you know, health-related risks will not be, I mean, you said they wouldn't be that relevant to companies here, but I feel the health-related risks would be very relevant because, I mean, at the end of the day, extreme weather and, you know, heat waves, it really lowers productivity. So, and at this stage, I'd also like to ask any of the audience here if they have any questions, because we're not seeing any questions in the Q&A. I have a questions in the sense that have you made any timelines in mapping your risks, Miriam?
No, not timelines in mapping our risks, but timelines in the measures that we plan, that we're planning to take in order to ameliorate those risks or reduce the risk level. So those are mapped on a plan. The risks themselves, I'm not sure how we would plan those on a time frame.
All right. Okay. So I now will hand over to Mehak Masood.
There's one question. Sorry, I'm just going to take that immediately, if you don't mind.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, the question in the chat, huh? Are carbon offsets part of your decarbonization strategy? It's a very simple answer. The answer is no, not yet. And that is because science tells us that offsetting doesn't do anything. Right? The science tells us that we need to actually reduce our emissions in the first place. And that's what we're going to do. And that's also where we're going to see the benefit to our own operations.
All right. Okay, there's two other questions. So shall I address them to you right now as well? What was the greatest challenge as an institution in measuring your GHG footprint?
Training people, but it takes me 45 minutes to train someone new and then they get much faster. The ongoing challenge continues to be running after people to get the data, but the data is all in existence already, right? Even in your household, you have an electricity bill, you have a gas bill, and it's not really much more complicated at institutional level to just have to run after people to get it.
Yep.
And the other question, how have you mapped the whole value chain for scope 3 emissions? Yeah, so scope 3 emissions are a bit more challenging, and there's, I suppose, the various methods for calculating scope 3 are still evolving as we speak. In fact, just yesterday there was a seminar by SBTi on the same. So if you wanted to know more about our tool, you know, go to our website or ping me or something, and we have a whole guidebook of 70 pages on how our tool works, including the supply chain part of it. I can't get into details at this point, I suppose.
Yes, and then there's a question here from Zilda Nabil as well. Where does an average small to medium Pakistani business start? It's easier for bigger universities to ascribe to climate action because of funding requirements, but what about a local business that does not have that incentive?
Okay, super question. And I'm going to answer with another question. So the Al Khan University works in 6 countries: Pakistan, as you know, Afghanistan, Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, and the UK. Which country has made the most progress in terms of decarbonization? Maybe we can't get an answer because this is a webinar format, but very few of you would have guessed that it's Afghanistan, right? Why? Well, because their supply chain is non-existent, because they don't have access to funding, right? And because they're, well, I mean, fill in the gaps. They're really struggling. And so obviously they're going to install solar panels. They're going to have a solar geyser. They have a biomass plant. They're doing absolutely everything they can to reduce their use of diesel and other fuels, right? So it's really an economic and supply chain question. And why I'm giving you this long-winded answer is really to say, actually, the benefit that smaller entities and the challenged entities will receive is way higher than those in the global north or bigger institutions. The other example maybe that I can give to explain this a bit further is an operation like Stadium Road, our biggest campus here in Karachi, a tertiary hospital, is much more difficult to change in terms of its energy use than a much smaller facility where you simply buy a smaller generator or slap some solar panels on the roof, right? So you don't need to wait for the top down of a bigger university to make a difference. You actually start with your own operations. And that's again where carbon accounting comes in. Once you start accounting and punching in your numbers, you will be really surprised and you will notice the hotspots immediately. You will want to make changes because finally you know where to start.
Yes, and I also agree with that. And the tool that the AKU has developed, it's applicable to anybody as they've shared it with their suppliers as well. So and at the end of the day, the biggest incentive is reducing the cost of operations. So if reducing carbon emissions reduces the cost of operations, I guess that's the answer at the end of the day. I'll now move on to Mehak Masood. We do have another question, but then when we have the Q&A, I'll ask this question to the panelists here. So Mehak Masood is been very kind to us and is joining us from Artistic Milliners. Artistic Milliners is a PBC member company, and we often feel that Artistic Milliners continues to surprise us in the good practices and the forward-looking approach that they have. Over to you, Mehak.
Hello, Nazish, and hello, everyone. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to share. Just start with 2 cents, which the other panelist has been talking about, that climate change is now it's a global issue and it's impacting the businesses, and now businesses has to factor that in their daily operations. We are currently looking at to a very bird's eye view. Now we are doing it in a very detailed view, where climate change risks are there. It's not only we are focusing on mitigation, but how we are doing works towards the climate change adaptation as well. So just share. Nazish, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. So,
okay.
Can you make it full screen? So I think later on we might.
Okay. Okay, so just to explain about our Artistic Millionaires ecosystem, we consider it as we make it say it as ecosystem, because we are vertically integrated facility. So it's been the company has been established 17 years ago, and now we have businesses in garment, fabric, spinning. We have our SFI and circular part, and we have our presence in 3-4 countries. It's UAE, Mexico, Central America. We say that America, and then in Pakistan. Apart from that, we also in the business of artistic energy, where we are working to develop projects. We already have wind farms installed, hydel, solar, and some hybrid other renewable energy alternatives, which we are looking into it. just a glance that we established, I explained, like in 1969 we have a fabric capacity of 130 millimeters annually. We have a garment capacity of 43 million pieces annually. We have a turnover for more than 400 million USD. We are in the top three exporters in Pakistan. We have a number of employees of more than 15,000, which have and proudly have a capacity of 43% women and 57% of men. We have a lead platinum certified facilities. We have gold platinum size facility units. We have fair trade, first factory to be fair trade certified. We are the
Sorry, Mehak, the slides are not moving.
Slides are not moving. Okay, I'll show it like that. Is it visible?
All right.
Is it okay? So
Yeah.
our focus area of sustainability is like we have a climate and water targets, circularity, millennial or traceability, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we have like in climate and water, we are committed to science-based target, zero liquid discharge. We do reporting on the CTP. Currently, we have installed 11.2 megawatts of solar panels in all our facilities. Don't have any rooftop left where we want to install another, solar panel. Artistic energy, as I explained, circularity, we are very much into it. We have developed a circular park where we are recycling post-industrial and post-consumer waste. We are world first C2C, developed the first world C2C coal certified fabric. We are also the only vertically integrated manufacturer that are member of Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and we have part of their redesign project, jeans redesign project. Millionaire Organic, I'll explain it to you later. And then there's our diversity and inclusion. We have a dispensement of fair trade, different female inclusion projects, and currently we are the first one to collab with Better Work and ILO in Pakistan, working on the improving the working conditions of workers. So a little snapshot of water stewardship. Uh, Considering it's a water stressed area, we are currently working. So we have 85% of water recycling, and our target of zero liquid discharge by 2025. For that purpose, we do have our largest ETP in the denim industry, which has a capacity of 1 million gallons per day. It's LEED Platinum certified. We are working on water efficiency. We have flow meters installed. We are doing research and development. That's our reducing the water wash from 60 to 14 liters per day per garment, sorry. And industry 4.0 and water management, it's also further like how it's a continuous work in process, how we can reduce our water intake for the manufacturing. So artistic energy, as I explained, that we have a wind farms of 100 megawatt of renewable energy, and which we are giving that to the national grid. And apart from our future pipeline is like we are working investing in renewable energy with one solar and two hydro plants in future. Coming to the supporting the supply chain and developing that, we have launched we are supporting farmers of Pakistan in developing the organic cotton, which is being certified by Control Union, and it's a it's a traceability. We can see the how where that's grown, how much water has been intake. We are currently, this has been done by retrace. We are with a German company, so we can for the backdating and having this transparency of data, we are working that. We have millennial organic farms in Balochistan, where we are working with 2,000 farmers and on the area of 10,000 acres. The second project is the Millennial Cotton Initiative, where we are doing the capacity building of our farmers in southern Punjab in Rahim Yar Khan. For that, we also have installed sensors in few areas of land as smart farming devices, which has given us the data. And there's a significant reduction of water intake, water and soil and other pesticide intake while we using these smart farming techniques to capacity building of our different farmers. Apart from that, we are working on these community communities on community empowerment, women empowerment, giving them livelihood on different options we are giving them, like bee farming, and also developing the skill set of female workers. So these are some of the snapshot of current. This is just a snapshot, but we are doing a lot in our work. Next, as part coming to the topic, that I wanted to tell that we do many businesses currently is underestimating their exposure to climate risk. While there are opportunities for businesses if they consider and factor into. We need to anticipate our climate change impacts. We need to take early actions to prevent losses and damages. This is what currently we are mapping down in our as an artistic millennials, as how we need to factor that in a further expansion in with the current economic situation as well. In the last year, we've been hit by floods in Sindh, and that comes up a very alarming situation. So we are also mapping how much climate risks are related as a direct. It's more like when there is a disaster, maybe it's a heat wave, it's a fire, or maybe a floods. It how it do impact a lot to our workforce. So this is one of the risks we identify, and plus the physical risk is almost there. So we really factor that in, and we using that private adaptation, that we really need to factor that in. Currently we are mapping the climate risk, and also looking for different insurance policies, how we can get the climate. The first step will be the climate proofing, and then further ahead what we can do uh, for minimizing those risks, because we need to avoid these significant economic losses. Our production and supply line is based on cotton production, and if there's a incident of floods or anything like that, it will impact our supply chain and our business as well. So of course, if there's no cotton being grown in the country, we still import that, but we need to import it more. So all these these risks, these are factoring in. And now currently what we are doing, we are developing a strategy of climate risk management and developing that matrix that goes with the economic value of our workforce, economic decision making as well. These are the small implications which we factored in, and also it for the other private sector organizations, that we need to mitigate the risk, and we need to adjust our activities and risk to transition. And considering as we also mapped our scope 1, 2, and 3, and we need to do the capacity building of our small and medium sized companies as well. So we are working with them as on their capacity building, not only on social parameters, but also how they can reduce the greenhouse gases. Certainly there's a lot of finance required for that, and we are also side by side working what kind of resources is required if there's a risk, how that can be mitigated, if it be it a physical risk, a transitional risk, a regulatory risk, or reputational risk, how we help our not only ourselves but also our supply chain suppliers as well, because we cannot reduce our scope 3 without supporting those suppliers. Like it's a very interesting chart I found on the UN Global Compact study, where private sector's climate risk, there's an intersectionality where their companies can develop vulnerable communities, and if they can work together, so they can develop a strategic opportunities to promote sustainable development through adaptation. So what we are currently working, and how the private sector can be factored in climate resilience in their. One thing is which Nazish has been explaining, and Maha also explained, that we really need to report those things, and these are part of now EU legislations as well, that we really need to have report our climate related financial disclosures and risk as well. So first thing what we are currently working is the climate proofing of our operations. now development of how we can develop new technologies and then services as well to address the climate risk, giving rise to the new businesses. For example, if we have we are having emissions, we want to be a net zero enterprise, so scope 3 is what we are mapping, but how we can reduce it, to looking into factoring into different technologies like carbon capturing, or if it's a cotton farm, how we can, like what we have did with the smart farming techniques, reducing that footprint as well, and similar things like that. for for now we are, we need to climate proof our operations as well at and energy sources, we need to be diversify in that. There are also regulatory barriers if we have to factor in. For example, we are generating our own renewable energy, but how we can get our 100% renewable energy from the grid. So what are the government strategies around that? So these are the things which we are currently exploring, and opportunities how we can move it further. This is few of the climate risk which we in different businesses like finance. The physical risk is the mortgage loans and portfolio, like by floods. I will just focus on the pharmaceuticals sites, like they have a critical site operation, R&D, heat, but they are exposed to heat, floods, drought. Similarly, these are also something which we are also being impacted. Energy like HEC, HEC is also one of the things, and the extreme weathers. So somehow another, these there are different companies which, and they are being impacted by climate risk, and they have categorized that in their operations and published that information as well. If I This is a snapshot of different like risk. For example, we are manufacturing, so we have a supply chain disruption, which I explained you earlier. But there are other sectors which has demonstrated, and there are examples of different risk as well. And there are a few solutions as well. For example, in we can procurement of low energy carbon from electricity producer, which I explained, low carbon distribution, like electric vehicles. Considering it's a very new idea, but me and my team is currently pushing how we can support that. Upgrade our supply chain, develop carbon negative farms in Pakistan. So these are but one way or another, our industry is linked to all these industries. So water management, finance, all these metrics somehow is part of our risk assessment. And also the climate risk, climate part is now is we are making the climate risk assessment as part of the planning of our operations. And currently we are working on the planning of our annual budgets and all, and we are looking into the climate costing as well for our work. So this is the I'm summing it up, is that we have to in order to achieve your business as well, and as well we need to diversify, we need to innovate, we need to look with a 360 view, not just one angle. And when you are working with the private sector, not only mitigation, now the businesses has to look their outward thinking towards the adaptation as well. So that's what I wanted to say, and thank you very much, Nazish, for the opportunity to share what we are doing currently on climate risk assessment. And also we are looking forward, since we are starting this, we need support from SERV and GIZ to make this help us to find more any tools are there, if there is uh, climate financing opportunities which we can develop together, something like that. So it would be very helpful for, especially for the textile sector. I'm speaking from that because we are a more progressive looking forward sector, and sustainability and all these things are very much important for us, not only just for a organizational point of view, but also for the business point of view as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mehak, for this presentation. I think quite a few things were highlighted in this presentation as well, especially the fact that that you can only start once you know where you are. So I guess the idea of measuring GHG is the starting point. That was and then the areas that you have already sort of started looking at once you've identified your risks. So both those presentations today identified the same thing, and it really I've also circulated a poll, and in that poll I'm going to now show you the results of the poll as well before I go over to the Q&A. And it's quite interesting that people are still unconvinced that that climate change will not impact their company strategies or operations over the next 5 to 10 years. And there's 1 or 2 people in our 6 people in our group that still thinks that there is possibility. It's not a belief. So it'd be interesting why you think that your company strategy and operations it's a possibility and not a belief, because it would be interesting to understand where we, so that we can take this forward when we develop the next stage. Once we do the survey, we will be developing the report and then the guide on what will convince your organization that climate related risks, and how to take it forward. So, but now back to the questions. I think this question was asked to Miriam, but I would like to have answers from both Miriam and Mehak about the targets that you have set. Are you able to track them, and how are you tracking them?
So I can start really quickly. So if you measure your emissions once, then in the next time frame, and globally that's normally considered to be a year. For us, it's quarterly. We just want more detailed data. So on a regular time frame, you just use that same tool and same approach with the same carbon factors to reassess your data. You punch in the new data from that time frame all over again, and then that's how you track it. And so you see if you get closer towards your goals. Of course, just collecting and tracking your data does not get you closer to your goals. You're going to have to do something. And then causality will become very difficult to do, right? Because you don't know if it was just hotter outside or why you emitted more in that quarter. And so you're going to have to really thoroughly analyze your data. And then it's fantastic if at that point you've gone into a lot of detail. So you have, various buildings rather than your institution overall that you've tracked. Or again, if you have smaller time frames, if you do it on a monthly or a quarterly basis rather than a year, so that you can actually clearly say at that point, we install that solar power plant, therefore our emissions go down, right? So that association is sometimes challenging to make, but hopefully if you take more measures, you get closer to your target.
Okay. All right. Mehak, how are you tracking emissions at Artistic Milliners?
Well, Nazish, that's a very huge exercise, when I joined. So we have assigned a baseline by 2021. That's our baseline. And then we currently report that on different portals. We on CDP tool, Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and on HIC platform by Sustainable Power Coalition. So we collate all data, and we are using the IPCC tool for our scope 3 and 1 2 3 mapping. But currently what we are doing is our suppliers mapping at the moment, and also from the cotton farms to our place, so we are doing that as well. So that's a bit long exercise. So we send out, manually we'll send out, questionnaires to our suppliers, having interaction with them. So that's how we collating the data. We have the issue because currently Pakistan don't have their own emission factors in that per se. So we are using the IPCC tool for that fact. But for going forward, we will be having I see it's very interesting to have your own tool, AQ is working on that. So we are currently working on Excels and all those sort of things, but we are looking forward that how we can more streamline the process.
All right. Okay. And then there's a couple of more other questions. Artistic millionaires, are you eligible for carbon credits? And if yes, could you please elaborate on the process and how much you have benefited so far?
For the facilities of the textiles, we are eligible for RAC because now RAC is in place. So we have like around 11 megawatts, but that's a very it's not a very significant amount. And yes, for our energy project, we do have carbon crediting in place. That's processed because that's a separate it's procedure. So we are working. Yes, we are eligible for that. And for that per se, any business can be eligible for carbon credits if they have installed a certain renewable energy. As Miriam and Maha can also tell that we do have climate bonds and other things in place. But now Ministry of Climate Change has we have also signed with the Vira registry standards as well. So we now the carbon markets is really interesting for us to explore as businesses in Pakistan.
Right. I think there's a question about the Ellen MacArthur's Foundation's platform. Could you tell us a little about it and your genes redesign project, Mehak?
So we are the members of Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and that's a very long process. There, to get the membership, you need to establish your need to show your root, how strong you are in terms of circularity and other things. So our genes redesign project is that we have a circular path and circularity. So the teams work out on different product development, how they can reduce the water and other consumption, and also how we can develop a carbon neutral product. So that was all about. The more details are, we just recently explained that in our social media than LinkedIn, so you can get more information from there as well.
Okay, all right, thank you. There's a question about ESG, and I'd like to ask Maha to explain this, and then I'll also add on this. How are you doing ESG reporting, and how difficult or easy is it to measure, document, and report against required environmental, social, and governance aspects?
So we as consulting firm are, yes, working with organizations on their ESG reports. If you are doing it for the first time, it's important to have really good data. I would suggest having at least 12 months of complete data across your different departments. Have a sustainability committee in place. It should be cross-functional with representation from across different departments, including somebody who's coordinating, ideally at a senior level, board or senior management level, to coordinate the collection of data. So ideally, you should be tracking certain metrics depending on which framework you're reporting on. So things like your energy consumption, energy efficiency, water consumption, water efficiency, solid waste management. These are just some environmental indicators. On the social side, you might track metrics like diversity, including like maybe the number of women at different levels within the organization, people who are differently abled, people from different ethnicities or minorities. So these are kinds of some of the diversity and inclusion metrics that you might track. And then on the governance side, Pakistan has very, I would say, focused guidelines on governance. There's a code of corporate governance that you can follow for the country. But really, depending on which framework you're reporting on, they do have very specific requirements. Most of the companies in Pakistan report on the GRI framework, which is relevant to a large number of stakeholders, right? So everyone from your investors, but also your shareholders, your employees, your customers and clients, and the data is relatively easy to digest. But the new reporting framework, the International Sustainability Standards Board, focuses on financially material, environmental, and social risks to your business. So essentially, investors who need to make a decision about whether or not to invest in certain companies, given that everything else is equal, they would choose to invest in a company that is more ranked more highly on, let's say, an ESG index, or which is more compliant with certain ESG criteria. So that's just come out this year in June of 2023, and the first, let's say, it will be officially launched in January of 2024. So we're not really 100% sure what an ISSB report will look like. It's still a work in progress. But really, I mean, I think across all the frameworks, what you really need to track is, again, your environmental, social, and governance indicators and metrics. We would recommend having at least 12 months of solid data. So you pick a baseline. That's your first step. You can pick a year where you want to kind of develop your baseline. And then, of course, once you have a good baseline, again, having a good idea of where you stand today, it's relatively, I would say, simple then to set targets for yourself across your different indicators and metrics, and develop an ESG strategy to achieve some of those goals and targets.
All right. Thanks, Maha. One thing I'd like to add is one way to identify what metrics or where you should start is to look at what your what other companies are doing in your sort of what your peer companies are doing in your sector. And sometimes you might not find one in Pakistan, depending on what sector you are, that whether they're reporting or not. So it's very easy to look across the border to India or Bangladesh or Sri Lanka. So you get a what the region is doing as well. So at the end of the day, if you're looking at ESG or sustainability reporting, and if you're targeting investors, or you're targeting it for exports, you need to see what your competitors are doing as well. So that's a good place to start. And then try and, as Maha said, there are plenty of frameworks, but try and find out, report to at least one of the frameworks, because then you can map it to other frameworks as well. So that's something. And at the end of the day, identify what issues are material to you. So those issues are the ones that you benchmark your company with, which is what your peers are doing at regional level. So that's what ESG starts off with. In terms of climate-related risks, I would also say it's a good place to start as well, just by looking at what your peer companies are doing and what risks they've identified, because being in the same sector, those risks would be similar to you. And then with climate related risks, there's what your peer companies are doing. You also look at what other companies are doing in your region as well. So it doesn't matter what sector it is, but because of you have to look at what the geographical risks are as well. So that's also a good starting point. But we'll talk more on that in more webinars to follow. So I would like to end the session today by thanking all of our panelists, and we look forward to participation from all of these attendees here on our survey. And we look for, because we're going to be opening the survey for a month, so hopefully we should try and get responses in quickly. I'm just going to show you what the survey looks like, just to end. So we're aiming to close the survey on 15th of September. Usually when we do surveys, even after we close surveys, we still need to reach out to companies. But please, because COP28 is coming up, and we would like, some good solid data to be represented from Pakistan, let's do this quickly. The survey link will be shared with you right after the webinar, and the survey will sort of look like this. And there's also an option to print the survey, so you don't have to fill it in at the same time. And if you want to get data from different departments, just print the survey, and then you can get data and responses from different departments as well. So looking forward to your responses. Thank you, everyone. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at the PBC. You've got Mehak and Miriam's email addresses. Please do reach out to them, Maha as well. Until next time, thank you. Bye, everyone. Shall we? I think we'll need to leave.